In this video we are going to take a closer look at the Kill Team Strike Force featured in Warzone Octarius, Book 1 Rising Tide. First we will go through the rules of this Army of Renown for the Deathwatch. Then we will discuss the impact on the Deathwatch meta and whether such a list can be competitive or not. In the final part, we will go through some initial concepts of list building in order to make best use of this shiny new Army of Renown. Welcome to SwissHammer, your channel for modeling in Warhammer 40k. My name is Temmer and I will be guiding you through this video. Back in July, Warhammer Community already dropped the first hints about Deathwatch getting something new in Warzone Octarius, mainly by including several Deathwatch models among other factions that were confirmed to get updates. With the previews coming in about the upcoming release of Book 1, the news is out. Deathwatch has received the so-called Army of Renown, which is the Kill Team Strike Force. What these Army of Renown lists have in common is that they basically get both unique benefits and restrictions over running a regular list. Starting with the restrictions, all units must be Deathwatch, and you can only include kill teams upgraded with a specialism, characters, Corvus Black Stars and dedicated transports. As any Deathwatch veteran will immediately notice, this is incredibly thematic, and it is also a completely different direction from where competitive Deathwatch lists have been going lately. While the latter also make use of kill teams, they rarely get upgraded with specialisms, and at the core of those lists are of course the dreadnoughts. For the benefits, the Kill Team Strike Force gains access to a unique warlord trait, relic and stratagems, to which we will get in just a moment. Furthermore, you can pick the same specialism twice, and all of the kill teams and characters get the Veterans of the Long Vigil ability. This new ability allows you to select one chapter tactic or successor tactic from Codex Space Marines at the start of each battle round, and it will be active until the start of the next. While the wording is a bit ambiguous, I assume that you make a single army-wide pick rather than picking for each individual unit separately. Either way, it will replace Xenos Hunters. You can only select each tactic once per battle, and in case you are using the Brotherhood of Veterans stratagem, the selection from the stratagem replaces whatever you selected through Veterans of the Long Vigil. Nonetheless, given the popularity of the mentioned stratagem, having this as a strike force ability is both incredibly thematic and incredibly powerful. Tied to this ability, we then get the extra warlord trait Xenos Bane to pick from, which is an aura. While a friendly strike force kill team or character is within 6 inches of this warlord, that unit has the Xenos Hunter chapter tactic, allowing you to double up on both the effects of Veterans of the Long Vigil as well as the default Deathwatch chapter tactics. I would argue that this one is pretty much an auto-take. Furthermore, we then get the Inquisitorial Cipher Relic. This one allows you to replace one of your secondary objectives after both you and your opponent have revealed their picks, and you can even take 2 Deathwatch secondaries with this. Given the limited number of units in this Army of Renown and its potential negative impact on secondary choices, I think this is a great option to have. Then lastly, moving on to the stratagems, there are 4 new ones to pick from. Specialism Extremis is certainly the one that created the most initial uproar. It's a pricey 3 CP stratagem that allows a kill team to have their successful hit rolls automatically wound the target. Now, this is where it gets a little odd, but the way it is written, for the non-Aquila specialisms, the condition is that they must attack the corresponding battlefield roll in order to get the benefits of the stratagem. meaning that if your kill team has a specialism against elites, they have to attack an actual elite in order to be able to use this stratagem. However, for the Aquila specialism, no such condition is listed. It simply says the attack was made by an Aquila model. It doesn't mention anything about matching battlefield rolls. This most likely needs an FAQ, in addition to clarifying whether successful hit rolls exclude auto-hitting flamers, which I assume that it does, but either way, as it is currently written, this makes the Aquila specialism both the cheapest and hands down best specialism out of them all, and in this Army of Renown, you can have 2 of them. Anyway, this is certainly a powerful yet costly stratagem to build around. It can only be used once per each unit, but given its CP cost and the fact that Deathwatch has an amazing amount of warlord traits and relics, I don't see this being used more than once or twice per game anyway. Furthermore, we have Battlefield Teleportarian for 1 CP, which is basically the equivalent of the Teleport Homer available to Proteus kill teams with a Terminator. We then have Honored Veteran of the Watch for 1 CP, which allows a Sergeant to gain an extra wound and take a Warlord trait. The potential of this is bonkers, especially when considering the war gear choices a Proteus kill team Sergeant already has, including a Xenophase Blade. Not sure how some of the options from the Paragon of their chapter Warlord trait are supposed to interact with this one. For example, does Echo of the Ravenspire or Speed of the Primarch affect the whole kill team or not? Either way, I expect this one to be popular. Then lastly, we also have the underwhelming Black Vault bolts for 1 CP. Similar to what they did with the special issue loadout stratagem, all bolt weapons get changed to heavy 1, but cause mortal wounds on rolls of 6, up to a cap of 6 mortal wounds per phase. This one is a bit mind-boggling, given that the special issue loadout stratagem is already being considered as one of the weaker choices available to the Deathwatch. The heavy 1 restriction just doesn't go well with our kill teams. With the rules out of the way, the important question is of course whether this Army of Renown can be made competitive or not. First of all, I want to start this by saying that I think regardless of its competitiveness, this is good for Deathwatch as a whole. Personally, I think that the Deathwatch meta has somewhat settled on dreadnoughts over these past few months and not moved much from there. While I would not argue its effectiveness, I believe that this has somewhat hindered the overall willingness to experiment more with the kill team elements, which is what makes the faction unique. Furthermore, given the huge popularity of the Brotherhood of Veterans stratagem, I also think that the Veterans of the Long Vigil ability will be incentive enough for many Deathwatch players to try and make this Army of Renown work. Which brings us back to the initial question, can it work? In order to answer this, I think we have to take a step back from dreadnoughts and consider where Deathwatch competitive lists were shortly before the rise of the walking coffins. With the tournaments of the past few months in mind, what comes to mind are lists like the Proteus kill team Terminators with Cyclone missile launcher spam that we got introduced to at the Dallas 2021 GT, or the same Nelson Cruz rocking 6 Proteus kill teams and not much else at the LCO tournament. In addition to that, Joel Wilson did well enough at the Rage GT with something similar. At the recent London GT, Michael Costello only brought a single dreadnought, and an Ironclad no less, yet did well enough with multiple Proteus kill teams and a few Primaris squads. Speaking of which, let's not forget about Deathwatch SH's Primaris Kill Team Heavy Firewall list featured on Goonhammer. Kill Team Heavy lists may not have won GTs in the past, but they came reasonably close on multiple occasions. With the viability of kill team heavy lists established, what does our new Army of Renown potentially lack when compared to regular competitive lists? The obvious dreadnoughts aside, What comes to mind are chaff and/or action monkeys, such as company veterans or servitors, or cheap yet durable and/or mobile units like eliminators or suppressors, or access to ranged fight last utility like the whirlwind that we have regularly seen in recent tournaments. Those actual datasheets aside, having to put a mandatory specialism on each kill team further inflates the cost of already costly kill teams. One additional note on company veterans: with the limited availability of datasheets, not being able to protect characters, one of the few things we can still take through the bodyguard ability, is particularly bad. But speaking of characters, there are in fact a few ways to compensate for the lack of datasheets through characters. As a quick reminder, characters include the apothecary, company champion, or even the justiciar. Even after the points increase, a chief apothecary can still work well combined with pricey kill teams. Even though not as good as a minimum squad of 2 company veterans with storm shields, a company champion can still be used to do actions, and the justiciar can provide access to fight last. Ultimately, I think this will boil down to difficulty of play. Not meaning to discredit anything here, but the dreadnought heavy lists are relatively straightforward, the models themselves are easy to play, there is a clear focus on the Devastator doctrine and corresponding tools, and a lot of CP is already spent pre-game. In contrast, in order to maximize this Army of Renown, picking the right chapter tactics with the right doctrine order and stratagem support is paramount. The entry level for this to work well just seems far higher. While I believe that the new Army of Renown is appealing enough for players to be willing to experiment with it, I think whether we see it in the competitive scene or not also depends on the future of the dreadnought heavy lists and additional gimmick like the bodyguard rule. If these tools were to become less effective, let's say through FAQ nerfs, the willingness to return to more kill teams and potentially the strike force would increase. To make a long answer short, yes, I believe that it can be made competitive, but we will have to work for it. Moving on to the third and final part, how could some initial concepts of list building look like? First of all, the mandatory specialisms are going to matter here. As far as I'm concerned, with the availability of double Aquila, 3 specialisms are what I would want to have. From a kill team perspective, I would most likely want 5 kill teams, but I don't think that this is affordable with the specialism requirement. This means that 4 might be the fine line between having enough kill teams and not overpaying for specialisms. For the actual kill teams, whenever our choices are limited, the immense flexibility of the Proteus kill team comes to mind. With them having remained a staple of even the dreadnought heavy lists, there are a variety of competitive loadouts for these, and let's not forget that ultimately the Deathwatch wets can be tailored to pretty much anything. I have covered the competitive Proteus loadouts in a separate video, the link is in the description. Speaking of competitive, let's not forget that prior to all the walking coffins, we had figured out the Primaris Kill Teams as well, and even over the last few months, one or the other has still shown up in successful tournament lists. I've also covered these in more detail in a previous video, but as a short reference, we have the Forest Kill Team with Assault Hellblasters, the Spectre's Kill Team with Helix Adept and Eliminators, and the mixed style Indomitor with Inceptors and Aggressors. One thing I would advise against is going for Indomitor kill teams with Eradicators. While it might be tempting now that we cannot take a separate squad of Eradicators, there's just no real synergy to be found in that kill team, and the mandatory specialism makes it now even worse. Even if you do combat squad them, I also think that this Army of Renown cannot afford a combat squad of heavy intercessors as an additional tax to all the stuff we are already paying for as it is. Bringing all this together, I think one variant would be to go max Proteus kill teams, then fill up with support characters. This will potentially put the heavy tax through mandatory specialisms, but it all boils down to how well the different kill teams can actually use them. Depending on how mobile those Proteus kill teams are, it could also make sense to run one Spectre's kill team for early board presence with the help of concealed positions. Somewhat of a middle ground would be to keep the Proteus kill teams at a max of 4, then take 2 Corvus Black Stars and support characters. Another advantage of either of these is that you can save some CP by having direct access to Storm Shields, meaning that you don't have to rely on the Dominus Aegis relic or stratagems like Transhuman when compared to Primaris Kill Teams. This will then enable you to actually use the unique strike for stratagems. A third option is what I will be personally experimenting with, as it happens to be very close to what I was running after the chapter approved changes anyway, and it will see a return of the Primaris Kill Teams, or at least in part. With the previously mentioned balance between amount of kill teams and forced specialisms in mind, I would aim for the following 4 kill teams. 1 Spectre's kill team with Helix Adept and 5 Eliminators, 1 Fortis kill team with Assault Hellblasters, 1 Indomitor kill team with Heavy Intercessors, 3 Plasma Inceptors and 2 Bolter Aggressors, 1 Proteus kill team with Infantry Bikes and the Black Shield. I would give these kill teams 2 Aquila, 1 Dominatus and the 4th, depending on where I place the 2 Aquilas. This depends on what they will do about the interaction between the 3 CP strat and the Aquila spec. These are primarily strong ranged kill teams, therefore Doctrine Order and my choice of chapter tactics would try to capitalize on that as well as survivability. Raven Guard when not going first, White Scars for mobility, which was already immensely popular with Brotherhood of Veterans before, just that it is army-wide now. Then the chapter tactics that benefit shooting style armies, such as Imperial Fists or Dark Angels. Even Salamanders come to mind, or Ultramarines for army-wide fallback and shoot is also an option. Personally, I tend to lean heavily into warlord traits and relics, meaning that I doubt that I would get to use the 3 CP stratagem more than once per game, but I would certainly want to get a round of shooting off with the Indomitor kill team. These kill teams then get supported by some of the old classics, like the Captain with the Dominus Aegis for the 5+ Invul, the Librarian with the Xenopurge Discipline for the 5+ Feel No Pain, the Biker Chaplain for Litanies, and the Apothecary for overall survivability. This is the old Indomitor Castle style of list stacking buffs on the Indomitor and potentially the Fortis kill team. Furthermore, I would then include a Judiciar for access to fight last and 2 company champions for action/secondaries. Not as good as company veterans by any means, but I'd be willing to give it a shot due to the lack of alternatives. The big downside of this list is of course that you are very likely to bleed assassination points. While the majority of the characters are meant to be for buffing/support and therefore don't have to engage, the 2 company champions as action monkeys and the Judiciar in general is risky in that regard. If the opponent has access to snipers, it's going to make matters complicated. With that being said, regardless of which approach you're planning to experiment with yourself, I think that this Army of Renown style of lists will have one thing in common. They will require a lot of playtesting, primarily to get the synergy between kill team loadouts, mandatory specialisms, and then picking suitable chapter tactics right. I also think that veterans of the Long Vigil in general will make them immensely fun to play. Either way, I look forward to seeing what people will come up with over these coming weeks and months. To wrap things up, over the course of the video, we have looked at the Kill Team Strike Force featured in Warzone Octarius Book 1 Rising Tide. This Army of Renown comes with some hefty restrictions for the Deathwatch, like being limited to kill teams with specialisms, characters, Corvus Black Stars and dedicated transports. In turn, we get the amazing Veterans of the Long Vigil ability, which allows us to replace the Xenos Hunter chapter tactics with that of the other chapter chapters for one battle round. While we cannot take the same twice, and it does not stack with the popular Brotherhood of Veteran stratagem, there is a unique warlord trait aura ability that can give us back Xenos Hunter on top of the selected chapter tactic. Furthermore, there is also an extra relic that allows replacing one of the secondary objectives. There are 4 new stratagems, and lastly, while the kill teams must take specialisms, we can choose each of them twice. When compared to the current Deathwatch meta, potential issues are the lack of dreadnoughts, action monkeys, or generally small and affordable squads like eliminators or suppressors. While we can somewhat compensate for this through the inclusion of cheap characters, this leaves us vulnerable to assassinate, and the kill teams themselves get even more expensive due to being forced into picking specialisms. On the other hand, kill team heavy lists have shown to be successful in the past. The question is whether the benefits can outweigh the restrictions. As early list building concept, we have looked into balancing the amount of kill teams with mandatory specialisms, going heavy on Proteus kill teams, weighing extra characters versus Corvus Black Stars, or going back to the Primaris heavy kill team lists. Ultimately, I think that this new Army of Renown is interesting enough for players to be willing to pick it up and experiment with it, and given its complexity, this will be sorely needed. Along those same lines, I also think that mastering it is quite difficult. As far as I'm concerned, there is a narrow line to be walked here between making it competitive or not. So that's it for my first take on the new Army of Renown for the Deathwatch and whether it can be made competitive or not. In the near future, I will most certainly return to it, further discussing various elements like the chapter tactics, kill team compositions, and competitive lists hopefully showing up at tournaments. To my fellow Deathwatch veterans, what is your take on the Strike Force, and are you planning to make use of it? Have I missed anything important or gotten any of the rules wrong? Let me know in the comments. Finally, I would also like to mention that there is a SwissHammer Facebook page where I will be posting links to my videos as well as articles I find of interest. I do read a lot about the hobby, but not all of it will always end up as its own video. I look forward to seeing you there as well. I do also have a Patreon page. If you like my content, any additional support is greatly appreciated as it helps me invest into future videos. As always, thank you very much for watching, guys. Your continued support is greatly appreciated. I hope you have been enjoying this video. Give me a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks again and see you next time.